Is it impossible to believe that selling my airplane, effectively pausing my aviation journey, was the best decision I've made in a long, long time? Well, for me personally, it was. And I'll tell you why. The biggest reason it was the right decision for me is really because I wasn't adequately prepared to be an airplane owner in the first place. Of course, I'm going to tie this together with my title and the Dave Ramsey piece at the end, and I'll tell you a little bit more there. But first, I want to share my opinion on the top 5 reasons why people stop flying. I want to do that for a couple of reasons. First, I want to share it with you before you get in too deep. That sounds so horrible, like I'm trying to keep you away from flying. That's not it at all. But I want to share it with you so that you're adequately prepared when you start your flying journey. Too many people start and stop, wash out, because they don't meet these criteria, or they find themselves stumbling through it, and they eventually quit. Or number 2, I want to defend you against these pitfalls if you're already flying. I want you to think about this. I don't want you to take my advice and just stop, but I want you to think if you can make decisions that help avoid these pitfalls as you progress through your flying journey. General aviation is an incredible journey. It's a great hobby. I think it's a good career. I've never done it for money, but it's an incredible thing to chase. My goal is not to dissuade you from chasing that dream. Rather, it's to give you the highest probability of success when you get started. So with that, here are my 5 reasons why I think most people stop flying. The number 1 reason is time. Time was a big factor in my decision making, although it wasn't the final decision. But people simply don't put enough time or have enough time to put towards successfully flying. I said when I bought the airplane, I wanted to fly 100 hours a year. By the year I sold the airplane, which was earlier this year, I think, I was only flying about 20 hours a year. I could not dedicate the time away from my family, my job, my friends, my community. I'll talk about that in a minute. I couldn't take the time away from it and dedicate it towards flying. I felt selfish. I felt like anytime I was going flying, it was just for me, not for anybody else. And I know there are ways to improve that feeling, but it's how I felt. So time is a big one. If you're going to start flying, you should really think about how can I dedicate 5 hours a week towards flying. That might not be 5 flying hours, but that might be maintaining the airplane, flying, cleaning, hanging out at community events, being part of organizations. Can I really do that? 1 night or 2 nights a week, can I dedicate that to flying? At this point in my life, I just couldn't. Number 2 is maybe a stretch a little bit, but I'm going to call it a lack of community. That doesn't mean the flying community is not good. It's great. There are tons of organizations to be a part of, tons of local EAA chapters, tons of airport boards, places that you can get involved. They exist. Communities through Facebook, communities all over the place, right? But if you tie that together with time, if you don't have the time to be part of that community, it's a little harder to stay connected. It's a little harder to be involved. It's a little harder to keep going. It's a little harder to be motivated, right? If you're going to fly, I'd highly recommend developing your friend circle at the airport. Find ways to tie the community to the passion of flying. Be really close to it. I couldn't do that, or I struggled to do that. Number 3, and this was a big one for me personally. It may not be for you, but it is a lack in ability or perceived lack in ability. And I'll call it fear or stress associated with flying. Listen, guys, I've been flying for 20 years. Knock on wood, never had an incident. At least not one big enough to worry about, right? I've had some close calls. But for some reason, as I've gotten a little older, seen a little bit more, heard the bad stories, I started to develop a little bit of anxiety around flying. If it wasn't the perfect day, maybe I wasn't going to go. And if you tie that together with flying only a few hours a year, which I think 20 is way too few, you start to lose confidence in your abilities even more. I take that a step further. I pursued a little bit more training. I started my IFR training in my airplane, and I had a bad experience. I just blatantly didn't have it that day. I think I still have it, but I didn't have it that day. And that crushed me a little bit. I just felt torn down. All in all, that anxiety and stress reduced the amount I was going flying. It reduced my confidence, and it was a factor in me choosing not to fly. Again, if anxiety and stress are starting to creep in and slow you down, I think you have to tie it back to my point before. You have to be part of the community. You have to talk to people who have gone through that same thing. You have to be willing to be vocal about it. You have to be willing to find ways around it, to find strategies, right? And I just didn't find the time to do that. All right, number 4 and 5 are both around money, but I'm going to separate them because they are different. Number 4, I'll just call it money, right? You know, at this point in my life, I follow some principles in the financial area, right? I think it's probably evident with the comment in the beginning of this video or the title of the video. I like to try and follow Ramsey principles. No debt, right? Pay for things in cash. Have different percentages or ratios of your life dedicated to certain buckets, okay? About 2.5 years ago, we built this house that I'm sitting in now. That's a big bucket for me. Really, at the end of the day, I just didn't feel like I was in the right financial position to own an airplane and to fly. The monthly expenses of flying and the variable cost that is flying hours were too much for me. Again, at the end of this video, I will share some more details there. I'll try and be as transparent as I can. And if you need to know more, you can get a hold of me directly and I'm happy to share more. But at the end of the day, I just didn't feel like I could dedicate the financial resources while working towards meeting my actual goals in life, my goals of retirement and financial freedom with the airplane as part of the equation. Okay, the second financial piece is what I call financial risk. Okay, this is really more tied to owning an airplane. It could be part of airplane renting as well, but I see it more as an airplane ownership risk. Even if I could afford the monthly expenses of owning an airplane, and I could, we didn't go without food on the table. There is some significant risk in owning an airplane. And I didn't want to be one of those guys that let his airplane sit in a hangar or sit out on the field and just fall away, right? Just turn into worthless. You know, the number that keeps going through my head, and it may be, I may even be out of touch. It may be more now. Maybe it's less. I doubt it. Nothing ever gets cheaper. But the number that kept going through my head is, what if I have a major engine issue? What if I have to rebuild the engine? That's $30,000, I would say, as a minimum, unless I did something really crazy. I don't have my AMP, right? I don't even know if I trust myself to work on the thing. But anyways, that $30,000 risk, I didn't have that. I didn't have that sitting in cash, right? I didn't have half of it. I owned the airplane in a partnership, so I would probably only need half, but I didn't have it. And that, not having the amount of money that it might take to cover significant repair or significant upgrades, led to financial stress. It wasn't that we weren't eating. It wasn't that we weren't paying our bills. I was just stressed about money all the time. And I tied that back to owning the airplane. So that was the 5th reason. My 5th reason, maybe, I think it's the top 5 reasons. Time, lack of community, lack of belief in your own ability, money, and money risk, financial risk. Okay, so here are my real numbers according to a couple principles that I'm trying to follow. And right now I'm following, but here are the real numbers, okay? And you can kind of understand how I worked my way through this. Just remember, I was only flying about 20 hours or so a year, okay? My overhead expenses were actually quite small. I owned the airplane in a partnership and kept it at a really affordable airport and made some decisions around insurance to carry liability only. I only had about $3,000 a year in overhead expenses to own the airplane. Again, I didn't owe on the airplane. It was paid for. And my hourly costs were about $100 an hour to fly the airplane. That's just some, I don't know, general data to get you in my mindset a little bit. So of the 2 principles, the first one is all things that you own with wheels and tires and motors shouldn't add up to more than 50% of your annual income. Okay, that's just one of the ratios that is kind of talked about. And again, I think it's more about the stress of the potential risk of having these things. Okay, so here's my quick math on what I own right now. But there's a little twist in it at the end. Okay, so I owned half the airplane. That's 30 grand. My car, it's only worth 5 grand. It's an old Mercedes with a lot of miles. My wife's car is worth about 10 grand. Okay, it's again creeping up there in miles, losing its value a little bit. My truck is worth about 10 grand as well. I've got old vehicles. Okay, just kind of the way it works. And we've got a boat that's worth about 10 grand as well. It's a 93. Boats are expensive. Okay, so if I did the math right, that means I own about $65,000 worth of, at the time, I owned about $65,000 worth of things with wheels, tires, motors that are depreciating in value. I understand airplanes, maybe not quite, because they do appreciate a little bit. Okay, so 65,000 means that my annual income should be 130,000 or more to justify having those cars, airplanes, toys, right? And I'm real fortunate, guys. Together, my wife and I, we make more than that. So at the time, I fit the calculation, okay? But the twist is I could see change coming, okay? I mentioned our older vehicles. We got to do something about them. So I've got a plan, right? And I'm going to execute it here in the next few weeks. My wife's car, the value is going to probably go up to about 40,000. I'm going to sell the truck. My car, the value is probably going to go up to about 20,000. We're going to buy some good used vehicles. Again, I sold the airplane. And at the end of the day, we'd like to upgrade the boat. The boat is a major source of enjoyment for us in the summer. So I got to do something a little bit different. It's probably going to be about a $20,000 expense. Okay. If I did the math right, new car, new boat, my new car, half an airplane, if I still own the airplane, that totals $115,000, which means I should probably make about $230,000 to be able to afford those things. And unfortunately, at this point in our lives, we don't quite make that. Now, of course, if enough of you watch the video, like the video, subscribe to the channel, well, maybe we'll get there. But right now, it's not in the cards. And I'm willing to bet on my peace, my financial stress to be lower than have an airplane. So that's the bet I made. Sold the airplane. The second one is about an emergency fund. Depending on your life situations, it's recommended that you have somewhere between 3 and 6 months of cash on hand, readily available, that you call an emergency fund, right? When you have that much, emergencies don't seem to creep up so much. And I'll be honest, through the last 3 years before we sold the airplane, I didn't have it. If we were lucky, we'd be 5 or 6,000 in an emergency fund, and I'm handy, so I always saved us some money by fixing our cars or whatever the case may be, limiting the emergencies. But that just wasn't feeling good anymore. So the sale of the airplane facilitated a pretty drastic increase in the emergency fund and a decrease in my stress. So that's it, guys. Those are really the two reasons, the two principles that I follow, right? That the ratio of wheels and tires and cars that compared to your income and the emergency fund, that at the end of the day made me choose to sell the airplane. On beautiful days, I regret it. But you know what? There's a lot more days where my peace, I sleep good at night, where that just means more to me. And it doesn't mean I'm done. It's just a phase, just a season. Anyways, that's it. I thought I'd share a little bit more of the detail. Again, it's not about me. It's about you guys. Defend yourself. Make a plan. Execute the plan. Fly safely. Feel good about flying. That's really what it's about, guys. Thanks all for watching. I'll try and be a little bit more active here in the near future.